Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here, got another Master Duel video for you. So, I was talking with some friends recently about the current Master Duel meta, and what hand traps I've been including to really make my life a lot easier, and it got me thinking that maybe I should do a video about this as well. I've done hand trap videos, or tier lists in particular, like every now and then in the past, but this format I think is definitely like significantly enough different that I am building my decks in different ways, to accommodate for this current metagame. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those hand traps that I'm going out of my way to, make room for, and then other ones that I just don't think are really that great right now, and why. Before we get into it, I want to just give real quick a huge shout out to both YouTube members and Patreon subscribers. Have seen a noticeable uptick of both of those, so thank you everybody who is supporting the channel. It really does mean a lot. It's the reason why I'm able to put out videos like almost every single day, so I really do appreciate that support. If you're interested in supporting, there are a couple of different ways as mentioned. If you want to see the YouTube content earlier, up to a week early, then you're going to want to hit the join button below next to the subscribe button. If you're interested in more exclusive content outside of stuff I post on YouTube, then you want to head over to patreon.com/hexlex. There I talk a lot about OCG card releases, the OCG metagame, looking at TCG ban lists and tournament results as well, as watching duel lives and posting videos that don't necessarily make it up to the channel. Every now and then I'll post an exclusive video to the YouTube as well, typically one that I'm thinking about publishing but just kind of end up not for one reason or another. So if you want to see some more content and are interested in supporting, really appreciate that. Either way, thank you very much for watching. So let's get on into this. When it comes to this current meta, there are a few things that I go out of my way to literally always play, and that's what's going to be up here. This will include obvious stuff, but also, hand traps that are more specific to this meta that I'm making room specifically for. I do want to make note of that in particular, right? That this, tier list is not universal. It does apply specifically to the current metagame, which is mostly dominated by Primite Blue Eyes. Snake Eyes also up there is a really good deck. We all kind of know how it is right now, but I guess as the meta updates, I might come out with another one of these. Anyway, let's just get on into it. I'll start at the top here with, let's actually start with Max C. So that one I think is pretty obvious. We're going to just throw that in literally always play, because you do in fact literally always play Max C. We'll get the other one, Ash Blossom, out of the way. These two are always going to be at the top of the tier list because you always play 2 Max C and you always play 3 Ash Blossom. So here we have Curry Photon, but first I actually want to talk about Battle Fader, because these cards actually serve pretty similar roles, right? They're both used to stop your opponent's battle phase. This is good against exactly Tenpai, which makes these hand traps, situational at best. However, I'm going to put Curry Photon in situational at best, and I'm going to put Battle Fader in the just don't play Battle Fader. The reason I say just don't play Battle Fader, as opposed to Curry Photon, which is situational at best, is that Curry Photon is actually a light fiend, which means that there are a number of Fiendsmith decks that can make use of this outside of being a very, very niche hand trap. Battle Fader, I don't even think can even be normal summoned. You have to special summon it by using its effect. And I'll say this in particular, I would not play a hand trap that's good against exactly Tenpai. Like, yes, the deck is annoying. You could maybe have considered these when Tenpai first came out and everything was at 3, except Kaiman and Pydra were pre-hit at 2, I think. But even then, I really don't think that was optimal. And certainly in this meta, I don't think it's really optimal at all to hand trap against exactly Tenpai either. Again, Curry Photon is a light fiend, so actually for that reason, it does have a role outside of being a hand trap exactly against Tenpai, and for that reason it's a little bit better. But when it comes to Battle Fader, Swift Scarecrow as well, just don't. I would say just don't. So this middle tier, the All Reliable, is for hand traps that, while I'm not specifically looking to go out of my way to play in a ton of decks, I definitely don't mind playing. I think Ghost Spell fits this pretty nicely. Ghost Spell does have its metas where I would go out of my way to make room for it, but the effect to stop things moving out of the graveyard is generally always going to be good. That said, I'm probably going to put Ghost Spell a little bit lower on the All Reliable end of the tier list here, because while she is good, It's really only in decks where I have like a ton of room for hand traps that I would really, really super consider playing her. A ghost girl that's a little specific in what she does that I would go out of my way to play in this meta is actually Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. When I say, I would go out of my way to play it or make room for this, I'm not playing Ghost Ogre in like literally every single deck. Again, that's going to be for the top tier. But Ghost Ogre is particularly good in this meta because Primite Blue Eyes is so big. And of course, Primite Blue Eyes does have a spell or trap card that is very, very important to destroy, and that is True Light. By using the Ghost Ogre against the True Light, not only do you effectively negate it, the card won't resolve, but you also destroy all cards in your opponent's field per the True Light effect. So that makes Ghost Ogre exceptionally good when, especially if you're in Master Rank, where Blue Eyes is literally over 30% of your matchups, then yeah, you'll definitely want to have a more specific attack. But again, Ghost Ogre isn't like as niche as something like, Curry Photon or Battle Fader gets exactly Tempai, because Ghost Ogre has a lot of uses against a lot of decks. It's just particularly good against Blue Eyes right now. Alright, so Artifact Lancia is a card that I would say is situational at best at the current moment. I wanted to include both Artifact Lancia and Chaos Hunter in this tier list specifically. One, of course, because they're obviously hand traps. Two, because while these cards right now are situational at best, and honestly to the point of bordering into just the just don't category, because there's really not that much utility in stopping banishes right now, that will not remain true necessarily moving forward. And again, I want to kind of highlight this idea that, as the meta evolves and more new decks come into the scene, what hand traps are going to be used will definitely shift as well. So Artifact Lancia and Chaos Hunter. These cards, while not amazing right now, are definitely going to be played a lot more in the future. Particularly, they are good against Malice. So definitely have your eye on these, but just don't play them at the current moment. Okay, so Nibiru. Nibiru is interesting. So I'm struggling because I want to put this either at the top of Make Room for This or maybe even a literally always play. You know what? I'll put it up here for now, because I guess I wouldn't say I literally always play Nibiru. There are still a handful of decks where I might not include it, but, you know what? Okay. I think I am actually going to put it in literally always play, and here's why. There's a couple of reasons, right? Nib is a card that I actually go out of my way to play in the average meta. I think the only meta where I really didn't play Nibiru was tier 0, right? That's the only meta where I would say I did not go out of my way to, always play it, or at least make room for it. But I've always been of the philosophy that if you're going to be drawing a bunch of cards off of Max C, you really want threatening hand traps to be able to draw into. And Nibiru is like the, quintessential good hand trap, because of course if your opponent has summoned enough to give you a bunch of draws off Maxi to dig for Nibiru, then the Nibiru is going to be live. Now there is the argument that but Nib isn't really that good against Snake Eye, and so especially the Azaminia variant, so for that reason it wasn't good until Blue Eyes came out. And I'll touch on that in a second, but I will say with Blue Eyes out, Nibiru is excellent right now. I don't even think it's always worth it to just play one Nib. I would even consider maybe 2 or even 3 Nib, and even my average meta deck right now, just because of how good it is against Blue Eyes, which again is so prominent in this current meta game. The Blue Eyes end board, once they go into 2 Spirit Dragon, you can just nib them right there. They won't have a way to counter that, and then they won't have a board. If they did Primite stuff, they'll still have Drill Beam, but that's pretty much it. And if they set Majesty or something, then that'll still be live. But that's so unbelievably minimal compared to just not having to deal with their board. And yeah, about Snake Eye, right? So here's the thing. Yeah, when Azamina and Fiend's stuff very first came out, it was kind of looking like Nibiru wasn't that great, because Azamina Snake Eye can always summon Ilya Sylvia on the 4th summon if they open Deception or Diabellstar, and then they're Nib proof, right? But that's if they open that way, and that's also if they're on Azamina. The format evolved pretty quickly where Snake Eye was either, it was kind of a 50-50 split between Fiendsmith and Millennium, or I mean Azamina and Millennium with the Fiendsmith Snake Eye, but let's be real, it's mostly Millennium. I'd say it's probably 60-40 at the very least, 60 in favor of Millennium. So Nibiru is much better against that variant, and yes, it is possible to play around Nib in that variant, but a lot of greedy Snake Eye players won't. I can tell you because I'm one of those greedy Snake Eye players. There's so many board states where I'm like, I could pivot into an Appaloosa to play around Nib, or I can make my end board like extra good. Let's make my end board extra good. And there are a lot of games where I'm just like, wow, if my opponent had Nib here, I would have lost so hard. So I do think that Nib is good against more than just Blue Eyes. It's good in general. It's one of those hand traps that is a lot more skill intensive. You really got to know when to use it to make max use out of it. But especially in this metagame, but also just in general, I'm kind of always playing Nibiru. There's another pretty prominent hand trap that I want to talk about. And this one, okay, so this one I also want to put in literally always play because I kind of am right now. But I'm actually instead going to put it at the top of make room for this. And that's going to be Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird is also exceptionally good against the Blue Eyes deck, right? Because, especially if they lead with Primite stuff, then they'll lead by searching with either Lordly Load or Ether Barrel, and then once you Droll them there, they can't use Wishes or search off Spirit. But even if you Droll them when they use Wishes for Eyes of Blue, that means they won't be able to search Mausoleum off of Spirit, which is actually critically important. That is the difference between them ending in full combo, or if you Droll them on Wishes, they can only reliably end on one Spirit Dragon. Asterisk, of course, it depends on what's in their opening hand. Sometimes they just have the Mausoleum. Sometimes they have like Neo Kaiser Seahorse and a Bestial, and they can just go for a Baron. Obviously, hand-to-hand situations are going to be different, but against the average Blue Eyes combo, if you Droll after they search off Wishes, they should only be able to end on one Spirit Dragon, which is obviously much easier to deal with than ending on, the full combo, right? Droll is also just good against a lot of decks in this metagame. A lot of decks are on Fiendsmith. A lot of decks will start their combo by searching for Fiendsmith stuff. If you Droll then, if it doesn't outright stop them, it will severely hamper them. Yubel is a great example of this. Yubel won't necessarily always be stopped by Droll, but it will make their life a lot more difficult. This is situationally true against Snake Eye as well. Snake Eye actually does have a pretty decently easy time playing through Droll and Lockbird. You can even like engineer situations where if you get max seed and or especially if you get Foolos. I actually have a game that I'm going to show. Well, I showed in a previous video. I'm going to talk about again in another video idea I have coming up here. But I've had situations playing Snake Eye where like my opponent Fooloses me. I'm able to do all my deck searches before even triggering the Foolos draw. And then after the first Foolos draw, I Droll my opponent and then I can full combo. So yeah, Droll and Lockbird when it comes to Snake Eye is like very situational how good it is, but against like the whole rest of the meta, it's just absolute blowout. Very good card right now. Great against Fiendsmith decks, great against Blue Eyes, so I'm always going out of my way to make room for it. There is the occasional deck where I actually don't have room, and if I have to prioritize like one Nib or one Droll and Lockbird, I'm going to go for the one Nib, right? Because Droll and Lockbird is a hand trap you want to open. You want to play like at least 2, if not 3 of this. I would pretty much never just play one Droll and Lockbird. But Nib is fine to play at 1, again, because you can just dig for it off of Maxi or Foolos. So if I have like one slot for a hand trap, and I don't have Nib or Droll, I'm going to dedicate it to Nib. But I do go out of my way to try to include, if not 2, a full playset of Droll and Lockbird. Speaking of birds, we got DD Crow here. DD Crow, I'm actually going to put this in the just don't category. Okay, it's not that bad though, right? Yeah, I don't think it's that bad. So is it situational at best? Well, here's the thing. The reason I want to put DD Crow in the just don't category is because I'll just drag Magnum Hut up here. Is because Bestials kind of exist, right? And in my opinion, in this current metagame, everything that you really want to go out of your way to banish in the graveyard is going to be a light or a dark monster. Again, especially if you're up in, master rank. But even if you're in lower ranks, Blue Eyes is still making up like over 25% of your matchups, right? So the Bestials obviously are going to banish all of the problem cards out of the graveyard, and furthermore, will also give you a really, really good body. And a search for the Magnum Hut is not irrelevant, especially if you happen to be playing a Blue Eyes deck. DD Crow is not a bad card. I don't mean to... So I guess that's fair, right? Because saying just don't play this right now is not saying that these cards are bad. And there are certainly metagames where DD Crow might even be better than Bestials, because what if the thing you want to banish is not a light or dark monster? Especially if it's a spell or a trap card. There's not many cards outside of DD Crow that can reliably banish spell and trap cards out of the graveyard. So in certain metagames, DD Crow would be on par with, if not alongside of, Bestials. But in this current metagame, with Blue Eyes being so prominent, I really do think you just play Bestials over DD Crow every single time. Alright, so Foolos. Foolos is interesting. I'll put it in the make room for this, because I really think that is where Foolos goes. You might think, like, wait, this is the maxi adjacent card, how are you not literally always playing it? Foolos is interesting. It's slightly deck dependent, almost, whether or not you play it. There are some decks that just play so much engine. Not only do they play so much engine, but they don't really have a use for Foolos outside of using it as a hand trap, and so those decks are really just not ever going to play it. I think Tier Limit's actually... I mean, you could make room for Foolos. I mean, that's the thing, though, right? Even those decks where Foolos isn't optimal, you could still make room for it. But there are certain decks that actually do have a use for Foolos outside of, using it as a hand trap. Even if it's something as simple as discarding it, right? Think about MathMech using Foolos for discarding for Silent Mining or as a small world bridge. Ubel discarding it for something like Gates, Millennium Snake Eye placing Foolos in the spell trap off of Wedju Temple, right? There are a number of decks that can do something with the dead Foolos in hand, even if you're not using it as a hand trap. So the decks that have absolutely nothing to do with a dead Foolos in hand and also play so much engine that they don't have room for a ton of hand traps would be the ones where I would not play Foolos. And I think that's the main reason why I'm not putting Foolos as a literally always play card. But I think I will put it a little bit higher than Droll and Lockbird, because I think I do go out of my way a little bit more for Foolos than I do for Droll in the average deck. Retaliating Sea. So Retaliating Sea saw a bit of popularity in the initial Fiendsmith Azamina release, right? Especially against Snake Eye, because so many people were on Azamina. That's, of course, fusion summoning with a spell, and also Snake Eye does have the original Sinful Spoils, OSS. But that said, even in that metagame, I thought Retaliating Sea was situational at best. Of course, Retaliating Sea does also have the banish effect, which is quite important and quite good against Snake Eye. And it's also not bad against Blue Eyes either, like, don't get me wrong. The thing is, though, I don't know, it just is really situational, honestly. Not just the fact that you can only summon it when your opponent summons off of a spell effect, but also, like, the banish applies to both players, so you're not going to be able to... You would have to maxi and or Droll or Valor, before you use the Retaliating Sea, because you won't have access to those anymore. Also, you're going to have to get the Retaliating Sea off of your board before you can combo if you're a graveyard-reliant deck, right? This is one of those hand traps where it could actually backfire on you if not used properly. So I think that also definitely contributes to this card being situational. It's not bad. Again, just because something's lower on the tier list doesn't mean this is a bad card. I just think that in this current meta, I would call it situational. And I think, again, even when, the Azamina stuff first came out, in that brief window where Azamina was played more than Millennium, I think this card still would have been pretty situational, honestly. Alright, so Valor. Valor, I'm going to put in the old reliable category, because it's kind of one of those hand traps where, like, I think Valor is actually the quintessential one of these hand traps where, when it comes to, like, the average deck, if I have some room left over and I just want to play a couple more hand traps, it's like, why not? We'll throw in a couple of Valors. That said, I'm really not going out of my way to make room for Valor, and in a lot of decks I might even play something like Ghost Ogre over Effect Valor. That's because when it comes to single monster effect negates in this meta, I really don't think they're that reliable. Well, I say as I put Valor in the all-reliable category. They're not reliable to single-handedly stop your opponent's turn the same way something like Maxi, Nib, Droll Lockbird, or Well-Timed Ghost Ogre might. There are still some hands where, like, yeah, you can Valor, like your opponent goes normal summon Snake Eyes, you Valor, and then they actually just don't have anything else. But decks nowadays have so many engine pieces, particularly extenders, that it's really, really difficult for that to be the case. Now, Imperm also does kind of fall in this category. There are actually a lot of decks, a lot of my builds right now where I would normally play Valor and Imperm. I'm actually not playing either of these cards. Or if I am playing them, it's like one of each as cross-out targets. Honestly, that is my biggest use of Imperm recently. I'm not even kidding, is using it as a cross-out target, playing a single copy for that. Again, because the monster effect negate, the single monster effect negate, you know, we're not in Sword Soul format where you negate Moye and it just ends your opponent's turn, right? And I'm actually grateful for that because I think formats where one Valor or Imperm is enough to just end your opponent's turn are kind of boring as a result. Even if you're the one winning by doing the negating, it just kind of doesn't really feel like you did anything for the win, right? So I definitely am fine with these cards not being turn enders. Just note that, yeah, these are not as powerful as they previously were. Now, again, this all reliable category is kind of mostly to highlight that, yeah, these cards are not great, but I do still play these in a fair number of decks. And obviously, Effect Valor you do want to play in Blue Eyes because she's a level 1 light tuner, so, and Spellcaster at that, so completely synergizes with the whole archetype. So there are some decks where, like, yeah, you'd want to go out of your way to play Valor, but for the average deck, you know, I would consider it only after a lot of these other things up here. Fantastical Dragon Fantasme is another one of these kind of situational hand traps, which, like, yeah, there are a lot of decks that link summon. Blue Eyes, of course, does it, and Snake Eye does it. You know, link summoning is everywhere, so you might think, well, why is Fantasme situational if everybody's link summoning? Fantasme is situational because, like, yeah, it's really easy to summon this when your opponent link summons, but how useful Fantasme is going to end up being is what makes it situational, right? Like, the draws aren't bad, but really are only helpful on the opponent's turn if you draw other hand traps. And if you want to draw other hand traps with a hand trap, there's two that are very, very good at that, much better than Fantasme. There's also the fact that the negation effect, to negate an effect that targets stuff, like, again, it's not bad, it's just situational. Like, there are a lot of instances where your opponent can, you know, completely out your board without needing to use a targeting effect. So in those situations, like, yeah, you would have rather had something like a Nibiru just wipe your opponent's board than a Fantasme. Yeah, it's not a bad card. And Dragon Link, you know, obviously being a dragon monster, I might go a little more out of my way to play something like this, but for the most part, nah, I'll just use some of these other ones up here. Red Reboot. I'm actually going to put this in the just don't category, because, like, it's kind of wild. Red Reboot is one of those cards, like, on paper, you read it, and this card, like, should be insane. And to be fair, in a best of 3 format, this card would be seeing a lot more play in the side deck, right? But when it comes to Ranked Ladder in the main deck and Master Duel, I really just don't think there's a reason to play Red Reboot. Like, even if you're worried about stun, like, stun has a lot of floodgate options that are not traps, right? Like Fossil Dyna, the barrier statues, so on and so forth. So yeah, I you know, Labyrinth, like, yeah, it's a good deck, but it's not prominent enough that I would play Red Reboot. I don't know, I think the only format where I mained a Red Reboot was, funnily enough, like, the format right after Circular came out, but right before Sprites came out, because it just so happened that, like, every meta deck was playing a really powerful trap card, and also Stun had more trap card floodgates, and it was a little more prominent at that point with Runic, so that's the only format where I've ever main decked Red Reboot in a best of 1 format. I would say just don't, honestly. Like, I'm not a big proponent of, like, Harpy's Feather Duster, but I would randomly main a Harpy's Feather Duster probably before playing Red Reboot. Because that's the thing, right? Like, yeah, you want to out back rows. What if you play against, like, Sky Striker, which is a back row deck that doesn't play trap cards, right? That doesn't really rely on them, at least. So, yeah, very, very, not even situational. I would just not play Red Reboot. Alright, so Psyframe Gear Gamma. You might think that I would put this in the just don't category because this card is at 1, it requires you to have no monsters on the field, and it also requires you to play the driver, right? All these factors kind of make you think like it's not really worth playing. But actually, Gamma is really more in the all reliable category. So if you paid attention to a lot of the top decks from the Duelist Cup Top 100, particularly Snake Eye builds, they were on Gamma. A lot of them were on Gamma. And I think that there are a lot of decks that could consider playing Gamma right now that aren't. Again, it's really easy after this card got limited to think that, like, okay, it was already kind of situational when it was online. You already had to play the driver, so now that this card's at 1, it's definitely not worth playing anymore. But Gamma, like, I don't know, I did almost put Gamma in the situational at best because it is, honestly, it's not only limited, but you have to, again, control no monsters. But I think Gamma's effect and impact on the board is just so powerful that, like, it's still just worth considering playing in decks that have a lot of situations where it would be live. Millennium Snake Eye is actually a good example of one of those decks, because think about it. You start with Millennium plays, you go through a significant number of actions that your opponent's likely going to hand trap before you have a monster on the field. Same as if you would go like OSS, sending a monster off your field, right? Ubel? Thinking back, I should have maybe considered making room for Gamma in my recent Ubel build, because again, Ubel with the deload distributing itself, and the Gates search, and the Nightmare Throne search, does a significant number of plays when you don't have monsters on the field. Same if like, for example, if you have only Phantom on the field, and then you go to negate an effect, and your opponent goes to negate your Phantom, or respond with another effect, then you could Gamma. Right? So there's a lot of situations in certain decks where Gamma ends up being live more often, and if you're playing one of those decks, I would really like if you're playing a deck where in the past when Gamma was at 2 you would play it, I would still very much consider playing Gamma even though it's at 1. It's better than you might think. Now, again, I'm not gonna like literally always play it, but I would consider Gamma to still be an all reliable. Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries is like the epitome of situational hand trap. I actually kind of almost want to put her in just don't, but like I would say if you're playing a deck that does not need its extra deck at all, and you can play just a bunch of like random one-ofs, then yeah, you could consider playing, you know, the Winter Cherries. But I'll say this too, there are a lot of decks that if they get hit with the Winter Cherries, they just have lines that they can do anyway. I would consider that to be the case for most meta decks, actually. Like, Winter Cherries is really weird because, like, yeah, sniping specific extra cards is good, but even when it resolves, it's not like a game-winning impact the same way something like Nib or Droll would be. It's a lot easier to play around than something like Nib or Droll, I'll say that. And of course, it has a much more difficult deck building requirement. Alright, so I'll put both Dominus, Impulse, and Purge in the make room for these category. These two hand traps are obviously a lot more different than a lot of others because they have very strict deck building requirements. So when I say make room for these, I'm not saying, hey, completely rearrange your deck to make room for either Impulse or Purge. But it's more like if, what am I trying to say here? It's more like these hand traps are like so high impact that you will consider playing certain decks just to be able to play them. Not that you would necessarily rearrange every deck to make room for one or the other, but Fire King Snake Eye is a great example of this. Before Dominus Impulse came out, in my opinion, there really wasn't much of a reason to play Fire King Snake Eye over like Millennium Snake Eye in terms of sheer power level, right? Obviously, you can just like Fire Kings and want to play them, and that's perfectly fine. But with Dominus, you know, Impulse, now all of a sudden, Fire King Snake Eye is kind of back on the map as its own separate thing, and it's largely because of this trap card, right? So that's kind of what I mean when I say these I'll put in make room for them, but I don't mean, hey, completely gut your deck so that it becomes a Purge or Impulse deck. It's not like literally every deck is playing one of these cards. If that were the case, then these cards would be up here, right? But it's more like if you can make some slight variations to accommodate these, you should definitely do that. So Shifter, I'm going to put the bottom of all reliable. it's like kind of a borderline situational at best or reliable card, because of course it does always come with the caveat of you're not playing a graveyard focused deck. But it's like, I would say that Shifter is a situational hand trap, but it's so good in the decks it's specifically situationally good in that it does kind of cross the barrier and become all reliable. For, again, decks that can play Shifter. It's Shifter. You don't need me to tell you why this card is good. Ghost Warner is definitely a situational at best card. I would only consider playing Ghost Warner in a deck, actually in a Shifter deck, right? Because you can't play Veiler in those kinds of decks because it has to go specifically to the graveyard. It's like Kashtira. If I'm playing like Shifters and Macrocosmos and, you know, Dimensional Fissure, then I'm going to be playing Ghost Warner, because Ghost Warner can negate monster card effects and only requires a discard. So definitely a situational card. Maybe even more so than Curry Photon, to be totally honest. And Will Charming Peruia is another situational at best card. Peruia is not like awful. This is kind of another one of those hand traps like Red Reboot, where like if side decks were a thing in Master Duel, you would see Peruia a lot more because it would be in side decks. But Peruia, it's not just that it's only good against decks that special summon a lot from the hand. It's actually more that like, it's just that there are so many other better hand traps, right? Like, I don't know. There are some decks like Tenpai, you play Peruia because you play so many hand traps. Tier Limit considers playing Peruia more often because it's Water Aqua, so it has some synergy there. But, again, it's just situational what decks you actually want Peruia in. Okay, so that is going to do it for the hand trap tier list. And looking at this here, I'm pretty satisfied with where I placed everything. So, again, Maxi and Ash Blossom are obvious why you always play those. Nib, I'm always playing in this meta. I'm honestly kind of always playing this card in general, but especially in this meta, it's really good against Blue Eyes. And then, yeah, I think Foolos is pretty obviously, you know, if you have room for it, it's probably the next hand trap you play. But really, Droll, Bestials, and Ghost Ogre are the other really good format-specific hand traps that I think are particularly good right now. I would consider playing these in just about every single deck, and I think you should too, if you have the room for it, of course. So there you have it. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you watch all the way to the end. I know I talked earlier about YouTube members and patrons, but watching all the way to the end of a video is also the best way, one of the best ways to support, not just mine, but any, especially smaller YouTube channels. It's very helpful for growth and, you know, the algorithm and all that fun stuff. But anyway, that'll do it for now. Let's move on to our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.